and then I tried a couple more, and a couple of them were complete flops. I had one that was like opening weekend at a pumpkin patch, and I thought that would be huge. That'd be fantastic. And I think I had 4 sales all day. It was terrible and a learning experience. And so I learned more from experience like that than I have from the big successes. Hello, and welcome to the Breadwinner Podcast. This is a show for microbakery owners who are building a thriving, profitable, sustainable sourdough business from their home, and they want to do it without sacrificing their quality of sleep, their sanity, or their ability to be home and present with their families in the moments that matter the most. If that sounds like you're in the right place. Today, I am going to be sharing my own personal story of how I started baking sourdough and then how I started selling it. So this will be a fun one, a little departure from the tactical tips and tools that I usually share. But I love to hear other people's stories, and especially when I was getting started, it was always and still is super inspiring to hear from others in their journey, whether they're a couple steps ahead of me or many steps ahead of me. It's inspiring to know what's possible. So my hope in sharing my story is that I can inspire you to know what could be possible for you, or maybe you're somewhere similar in your journey as me, and you can glean bits and pieces to just help optimize your business for yourself. So a little bit of backstory. I have been baking forever. We have pictures of me wearing nothing but an apron, baking next to my grandma. And since adolescence, I have been tinkering in the kitchen, developing recipes. I was always baking some sort of cakes or muffins or brownies or cookies. And my mom was really good about cultivating a space where I could just experiment and have fun and develop my intuition. And so I have taken that with me into adulthood. I still love to bake, still love to create good food. I used baking when I was 19 and working a job and in the middle of nowhere with no friends to make friends. I realized that if I baked chocolate chip cookies, people would come to me and I would make friends. And so food brings people together, and I love that part of it. And that's just a little tidbit along the journey of my experience with baking. So I also love bread. And when I was postpartum with my second baby, I realized I have a gluten sensitivity, and I'm a much better, happier, healthier person if I avoid gluten, which means no traditional bread. So we were buying a ton of store-bought gluten-free bread for several years. And finally, I got to the point where I was like, I really want to try to figure out how to make my own bread. And gluten-free bread is very challenging to make. So I tried to dip my toes into sourdough. And in 2021, I gave it a try, and it was terrible. So bad. All of my loaves came out as bricks. I was chronically underproofing everything, but I didn't know enough to identify what I was doing wrong. So I gave that a try for a couple months in 2021, eventually just put it on the shelf and took a break for a couple of years, went back to buying gluten-free bread from the store. And then finally last year, I was in the right season in my life where I was ready to pick it back up again. And last summer, I started baking again. I was far more successful. And in that season, I really sat with the slowness of the process. And I think because I approached it differently and let it feel more almost like a soulful experience, my success rate was much higher. I also immersed myself in learning the art and the science behind sourdough. I checked out library books. I read everything I could read online. I watched YouTube videos. I just really threw myself into it. And because I was learning the full process and experimenting, but also giving myself the time to stick with one recipe for a while to really nail it and figure out how it's supposed to feel, I did a lot better that time. What that led to is just this almost obsession with baking sourdough. I was baking so much, more than we could eat. And it got to the point where we were just putting everything in the freezer and running out of freezer space. And so I had been seeing posts online of people selling sourdough or other baked goods out of their home. Ever so often, I would see a post on a local Facebook group of someone with their baked goods offering them. And sometimes that post would have quite a few comments of people claiming. And so it planted a little seed in my mind of maybe I could try this. I was in a season last summer of looking for a job, but our family schedule makes it hard to work the normal 9 to 5. And so I was looking for kind of a unicorn job. It was a pretty stressful season as I was sending in all of my applications and resumes and not getting any traction anywhere, finding anything that would fit with the schedule that our family needs. And so during that time, I was also going on this kind of healing sourdough journey, baking so much bread. And then we also decided spontaneously to host an exchange student from Germany. And so she was 16. She came over to spend her high school junior year here and going to an American high school. And if you know Germans, you know they know really good bread. Some of the best bread in the world is in Germany. And so our sweet exchange student was super complimentary of my bread, which felt like such an honor because she has grown up with really good bread. He made a couple comments here and there about how I could start a bakery. And at first I sort of brushed it off. No, that's not for me. That's for other people. I'm not here to be a baker. I'm just baking for the family. But the seed was planted. And so in September, I had a couple extra loaves and I was really proud of the way they looked. And I put a picture up on Facebook and I shared in the previous episode more about what this post said, but basically it was conversational and asking for suggestions about what I could do with my extra bread. And I had about 50 people comment and say they wanted to buy bread, which was an overwhelming and very exciting response. I did not expect quite that much traction, but I just ran with it. So that day I had those 2 loaves and I arranged to meet 2 people with them. And right away, I was like, nope, not doing delivery anymore. I just knew that if this was going to be a thing that I was going to pursue, I had no idea where it was heading. But I knew from the very beginning that if I was going to pursue it, it had to be sustainable. It had to be something that worked in with my life. And driving around to meet people was not going to work. So right away from that very beginning, I had my inboxes flooded with messages and I realized that this was a recipe for letting people fall through the cracks, which is something that I struggle with. I very much struggle with keeping up with inboxes or with DM boxes. So if you ever DM me and I don't respond, I'm very sorry. It's not personal. But I knew that if I was using Facebook Messenger and comments on Facebook to try to take in orders, that I was not going to be treating my customers well, that I would be missing people. And so right away, I set up a Google form, and that was kind of the next step. The follow-up post to that first Facebook post was a thank you, and then I included my Google form. And I said, here's how to order if you want more. And then I just would cut off my form as soon as I reached the point where I felt like I had too many orders. And so it was a manual process for a while. But I applied previous business ownership knowledge to know that I needed some systems in place to make sure that I was going to be taking care of customers as well as I could, while also keeping my costs as low as I could. So the first thing that I invested in on a system side was a program called Project Broadcast, which I talked about in my previous episode. But it allows me to receive and send texts, both individual personal texts and then also when my menu opens each week. And so doing that allowed me to have one place where all of my texts were coming in rather than Facebook messages and comments and whatever else and text to my personal phone. It all goes into the app. And so I was doing that 2 or 3 times a week. At first I was like, I can do like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And a couple loaves on each day would come in and I was staying on top of it pretty well for a few weeks, and then it felt like too much. And so I realized I probably needed to pare back a little bit. I think I went down to 2 bake days a week until after Thanksgiving. And 2 bake days was more manageable than 3. And so I was getting a few more orders at a time and spreading them out over 2 days rather than just a couple of orders at a time over 3 days. In this same time, I tried a couple of markets. I think my first one was So my Facebook post was probably the first week of September. My first market was the third week of September. I joined a local market that comes up twice a month, just a couple minutes from my house. And I brought around 30 loaves, and I think I took about 5 home. And I was really proud and really excited, and I had a lot of community support, and that sort of helped build some momentum. I posted about it on Facebook groups, and that was a really good first market. And then I tried a couple more, and a couple of them were complete flops. I had one that was like opening weekend at a pumpkin patch, and I thought that would be huge. That'd be fantastic. And I think I had 4 sales all day. It was terrible, and a learning experience. And so I learned more from experience like that than I have from the big successes. And we'll be talking more about this in an upcoming episode about farmers markets. But learn what questions to ask before I join a market, learn which markets are more likely to be successful and which ones are more likely to be slow. I've applied all of that knowledge and I'm continuing to learn, but my markets now are generally a lot more reliable and predictable because I kind of stick with the same ones that are proven to be successful. Part of my learning journey was figuring out bulk baking. Because I had been learning so much, reading so much, consuming so much knowledge, I had a fairly good understanding of how my dough was going to behave, but I definitely had some major overproofing moments, especially in my first few months where the loaves were just flat, very underwhelming. And so there were times where I baked 20 loaves for a market and really could only bring 10 or 12 because some of them were just pitifully sad. After about 3 markets and maybe a month and a half of baking in Dutch ovens, I invested in a baking steel. A baking steel was my first larger equipment investment. And that allowed me, after some trial and error, to figure out how to open bake. And I could bake 4 loaves at a time instead of 2 or 3 without the shuffling of Dutch ovens. So this was a really big game changer for me. It helped make my process much more efficient and it made it more enjoyable for me. Once I figured out open baking, which is a trial and error sort of process and different for everyone, but once I got the system that worked for me, I really enjoyed bake day and pulling those loaves out of the oven. The other larger equipment investment that I made pretty early on was a couple of big plastic dough bins, because in the very beginning I was using bowls and mixing everything up in bowls and having 2 or 3 or 4 bowls out on the counter, which just was not sustainable. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me. It drove my husband crazy and he was very patient and supportive, but that just was not going to be a sustainable process. So using a couple of big dough bins kept it from having bowls sprawled all out over the counter. And that was a very good investment, not super expensive. And I went to a local restaurant supply store to buy a couple of bins. We can also find them on Amazon, but that helps make everything a lot more efficient. So I could hand mix 6 or 8 loaves in a bin versus 2 or 3 loaves in a bowl. So around this time, we were approaching Thanksgiving. And so I said, I'm going to go big for Thanksgiving. I have a ton of traction, a lot of repeat customers. They keep coming back for me. And so I offered a lot for Thanksgiving. I offered dinner rolls, which are shaping them manually one by one takes forever. I offered pull apart cinnamon roll bread along with regular loaves of bread and croutons. And I don't even know what else. I did too much. And I learned more about my capacity in that week than I had learned in the previous weeks. So at that point, I whittled down. I definitely went down to 1 bake day a week after Thanksgiving. I was worn out and I knew that I couldn't manage regular bake day alongside a holiday bake day. It was just not sustainable. The month of December was steady. And I did not offer nearly as much. I actually didn't do any special holiday orders besides a little treat offering for teacher appreciation. After December, there were a couple of slow weeks in January, which is pretty common to be expected. But I pretty quickly settled into a more even pace in January, and then moving into February, I had a lot of momentum between my weekly pickup days and my market every other week. It was getting to the point where we were clearly outgrowing my home kitchen. My husband and I had to sit down and talk about the future of the business. If it was going to continue to grow in the way that it seemed it had the potential to do, and we wanted to give me the time and space to stick with it and see it out, we were going to have to troubleshoot, problem solve creatively. It was driving us both crazy, having me take over half of our family kitchen for the better half of a week, every week. So up to this point, I had been fully baking out of our residential kitchen oven, just 4 loaves at a time on a baking steel. And it was very much a bottleneck, as I'm sure many of you can relate. And so I began to explore a lot of different options. Of course, there's the bread ovens option, which is a great option. But for me, I needed something that could stand in the gap between now and when I could invest in a bread oven, which is I'm choosing to wait a little further down the road for that. And so what that looked like for us was I took over half of the room directly adjacent to our kitchen, which is a formal dining room, but we were using it as a playroom. So I took over some of that space so I could have a dedicated prep table. And then I invested in a double oven on Facebook Marketplace. I spent $250. And then I invested in the electric work to have the outlet installed, which is the same outlet I'll need down the road for a bread oven. So it was an important investment either way. But that inexpensive older double oven doubled my baking capacity and immediately improved my sleep quality. 10 out of 10 recommend. Also invested in a dedicated fridge for my dough somewhere around that time. I went with just an upright freezer off of Facebook Marketplace and using a temperature controller from Inkbird on Amazon to run that freezer as a fridge. And so I can proof about 80 loaves in there, which made a big difference. I wasn't trying to cram loaves into our family fridge. So between those equipment investments and then moving into a space where I had a little more room to spread out, I felt like I had optimized my business in a really good way. So the final step that I'll talk about in this episode is moving off of Google Sheets, which I had been using all the way up to this point, onto an ordering platform. In retrospect, I would have made this shift a lot sooner, but my pace worked for me. So I had been using free Google Sheets with a lot of manual processes, and I moved over into using the Simply Bread app. So this took out the manual text with each order. It took out monitoring my form to make sure I didn't get too many orders, because I could set my inventory limits and I could schedule a weekly post when my orders went live. So that was a big game changer in terms of efficiency and communication with my customers. That also allowed me to switch over to fully prepaying with my orders. I chose not to take any cash anymore. So customers who really wanted to pay with cash still come see me at the market, but this way I don't have to worry about keeping track of people's totals and making sure that they paid when they pick up. I every once in a while would have an order slip through and not get paid for. And so I don't have to worry about that anymore with the Simply Bread app. That was a very important shift. And now I'm just continuing the momentum, keeping tabs on my growth and reining it in when I need to, and then pushing out some extra marketing when I need to. So for example, this week it was a little bit slow, so I put out a couple of extra Facebook posts to boost my sales just a little bit. But continually paying a lot of attention to how my customers are showing up, what they are buying, what they're asking for, and doing my best to offer that in a way that is sustainable, that still does not sacrifice my sleep, my ability to be present with my family as much as possible. And so I will continue to grow. We are in July as this episode is being recorded, and I am almost at 1 year of selling. And so it'll be fun to follow up in another year and see where my growth is taking me. But I really think there's a lot to be gleaned from those first 6 or 8 months in business and the investments in equipment, in processes and systems. So currently in my business, I decided over the summer while my kids are home to continue with the farmer's market near our house that is every second and fourth Saturday. And then instead of doing a weekly porch pickup, which would mean 2 bake days a week, I do 1 porch pickup on the opposite weeks from the market. So it's first and third Thursdays are a porch pickup, and then second and fourth Saturdays are a farmer's market. So I have the potential where I could have worked a lot more and grown a lot more and brought in a lot more business this summer, but I chose to intentionally step back so that I could be more present with my kids while they're home for summer. And that's been a really good decision for us here as we are winding down summer in about 5 weeks to get back into the school routine. I will hit the gas again and we'll see where we go from there. But one of the beauties of owning your own business is that you can choose when to hit the gas and when to slow down and rein it in and how you want to market and what orders you want to take on. It's a constant learning process, continually adjusting, continually learning from what doesn't work and leaning into what does. But it's really fun. It's so rewarding and so fulfilling. I hope this episode was helpful for you. I hope it gave you some ideas, maybe inspired you a little bit. If you have questions or want to know more about any of my processes or anything that I talked about in this episode, come over to Instagram and send me a message. I'm Caroline Bauer _sourdough. I am an open book and I am here for your success. Don't hesitate to ask me anything. If you were inspired or had fun listening to this episode, it would make my day if you would screenshot it, share it on Instagram and tag me, and then I can share it too and we can all connect and see where we're all baking from together. I'm so honored that you took some time out of your day to listen to this episode. I'll be back next week with another episode on Monday and Thursday. So come on back. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, make sure you do that so you don't miss an episode. Until then, happy baking.